Love it.
I was saying I'm going to change his t-shirt to Hot Tony. Hot tuna.
That's so funny.
The hot tuna.
Like, how funny would that be?
So good. I had a friend called Kate. She used to drive when we all passed our tests, she drove a Ford Ka. Someone bought her a TE sticker, so it looked like she was driving a Ford Kate.
I love it.
Legendary.
That's amazing.
Yeah. I haven't sound checked you. Are you sounding good?
I sound really good.
Awesome, bro.
Yeah, I can hear it bionically. I love it. This is rolling. Thank you so much for coming on to our show in your studio, Matthew.
Bro.
Best of Belfast.
Absolutely. I'm just glad you guys came. Honestly, like it's a real honor to be here, and thank you for making the trek and turning my humble audio studio into a full-blown video thing. So thank you.
Hey, appreciate it, man. I mean, we're really honored to have you on our show in your studio. It's an inspiration. Obviously, you've been doing this for quite a bit. Absolutely. Are you almost at your 300 episode?
Yeah, we're pretty much there, yeah.
Incredible, incredible. And the last time I was here, I mean, time flies.
Oh, bro, crazy.
Jeez, I mean, was that like 3 months already?
Yeah, I was just thinking, like, this is like the completion of the trinity of our podcasts, isn't it?
I think so,
Because we did one with Scott Riley together, and then I interviewed you, and now the mic's reversed, so it's like, dude, the trinity is complete.
Amazing, man. Amazing. I'm sure more to come as well. And we can go so many directions. I am definitely curious about your work with like mental health.
Oh yeah.
I think it's obviously important, you know, with just the fast-paced nature of our modern life. And it's amazing that, you know, it's not as much of a stigma anymore.
Oh yeah.
Being more and more talked about. Paddy Pimblett from Liverpool, like came on to after he won his fight and talked about how important it was and how he lost a friend who, I mean, didn't reach out, unfortunately. But so let's get into that. What made you move into that direction in terms of like you have your current podcast, but you have your other project with mental health?
Totally. So it depends how far back you want to go. Like I can give you the origin story.
Yeah, let's do that because obviously you've gone through your own journey as well with that.
Totally. Yeah. So I think like the origin story, like many of us who are pretty vocal in the mental health space, is we've walked through and are currently walking through stuff ourselves. You know, so my journey with mental health started probably when I was around 11. And so I had something that's super common. You ever heard of glandular fever?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, kissing disease. You know, it's the classic, like, around the teenage years. I think in America you guys might call it mono.
Mononucleosis, yes.
Yeah, I think my professor friend who I do the mental health project with, he refers to it as the Epstein-Barr virus.
Right. Okay.
So lots of fancy different names.
I didn't know that link.
That's the connection.
I didn't know that.
So, like, Epstein-Barr, glandular fever, mono, that was kind of like the reaction to that for most people is they've got a really bad flu, you know, your glands swell up like mad, you can't eat for a few days, and that's it, you reset to normal. There is a small kind of percentage, probably not really that small, but there's a group of people who kind of had long COVID before long COVID was cool, where their body had an extended inflammatory response to this kind of big virus that hits your system that didn't really get cleared out properly.
Were you partying at 11?
Do you know what? I was so disappointed whenever I got kissing disease because I was like, I've never even kissed a girl before.
I was going to say, man, I was like me, a Big Daddy Mac at 11 years old.
I was like Peter Parker before the spider bite, you know, big glasses, super nerd, like playing Mario Kart all day and RuneScape, and just was like, you know, again, I was a nerd before it was cool. And really loved tech. I got that from my dad. My dad was really into tech. We had internet pretty early in the house. I was always into, like, you know, pirating stuff and hacking stuff and modding stuff. And so, you know, was really, really into all that. And it's funny, that served me so well.
Just on more of the software side or also hardware?
No, never hardware.
Okay.
Never, ever. Like, even to this day, I'm useless. Like, my wife is the handyman in the house. I have no shame in it.
Judy's the same.
You the same?
Yeah. She's got to, like,
slap me. Bring it on. Yeah. Useless on a hardware perspective. Software, never got into programming or anything like that, but, like, know my way around. Like, I would be a solid IT guy in a school. Do you know what I mean? Like, I could slot into that pretty comfortably. So, had glandular fever, didn't really think anything of it. It was just after my 11 plus, which is like our big exam whenever you're 11. It determines the fate of your future, or so it feels like at that age. So I just had finished that. It was P7, which is your final year of primary school. And we were all really looking forward to like the fun part of school we've always been promised. You know, this is the time where you've got nothing really to learn. You go on fun trips. And I remember we went on a tour of like a high school called Crumlin, and just came back from that trip. It sounds like a huge trip. It was like a 2-hour trip, and just was feeling really sluggish. That was the start of a 6-month journey where I was kind of bedridden, lost a lot of muscle, lost a lot of strength, didn't have much to begin with, and, you know, was really quite sick, like to the point where I couldn't climb the stairs at some point. And of course, hindsight being 2020, you look back and everything that I do now, and we know as a society about mental health, that was kind of a recipe for disaster on the depression front specifically. And so started really, really battling with depression. Wouldn't even have had that language at that time. The word depression didn't even really come into my life until I was about 16, after, you know, 5 years.
It's just hard to believe because this is what, like late 1990s or early 2000s?
I'm 95, so yeah, that was early 2000s.
Early 2000s.
Yeah.
That's hard to believe.
Even the 2010s, probably,
Yeah, and within like 15 years or so.
Yeah. And a lot of that was cultural. A lot of that was probably family culture as well.
Yeah.
What the heck is mental health? Nobody knew, you know? Like, being a 90s kid is funny because I think our parents were put in a really difficult position because there was so much newness. You know, they were the first parents to experience the internet. There was no rules, there was no guide rails, there was nothing to hold on to, and so there was a lot of flying by the seat of your pants, and a lot of mistakes were made by all parents, you know, as parents do. That's kind of parents' jobs.
Yeah, that was the wild, wild west.
Yeah, so, and so interesting because even like going through the health system with the NHS, and God bless the NHS and all that stuff, there was no real vocabulary for depression. They were just like, what is this? Is this an extended virus? You know, is this long COVID? Is this long glandular fever or whatever? And the mental health stuff was only starting to get explored at 16. And I remember that was kind of like a light bulb moment for me where I was like, oh my goodness, like I knew it wasn't something.
Yes.
There's years in my life where I was like, do I have cancer? Do I have some sort of weird disease that's like, you know, slowly killing me or whatever?
And do they like classify it as chronic fatigue syndrome?
You hit the nail on the head, brother. Yeah. So it's chronic fatigue syndrome.
We don't know what it is. Pop it in that box.
Yeah, it's kind of like, and I don't mean this in an offensive way at all, it's kind of like irritable bowel syndrome.
Yeah.
You have this umbrella collection of symptoms. We don't really know, so we're going to put you in this box because it's the only way we as a system can even remotely try to process you with the means that we have. So, you know, 6 months, 11 years old, going through puberty. It was like a hilarious Peter Parker moment. I remember I wasn't in school for 6 months. I remember coming back and being like a foot taller and having a deep voice, and everyone else was like that, you know. All like I left, everyone was like playing football in Mario Kart, and I came back and everyone was like trying to kiss each other, and I was like, whoa, like what the heck happened here? But in that time frame, I had like a real rock bottom experience. We had some complications in our family life as well, and I to the point where I was suicidal, and was, you know, from a very young age. I've always been quite mature for my age for whatever reason, so it sounds bonkers to even say this as an 11-year-old, but, you know, was stockpiling pills, set a date, knew exactly when the best time to take my life would be, and as clear as day. And I remember sitting at the kitchen table, pills in front of me, starting to pop them.
Jeez.
And having what I can only describe as a spiritual experience. I was raised in the Christian faith. My parents were very religious, so I was sent to Sunday school religiously, you know. I was hitting probably your 5 hours of church a week sort of kid.
Yeah, Judy was
turbo Christian, you know.
Yeah.
And so we were raised on all the Sunday school stories, all the Bible stories. I knew them backwards. And for anyone who comes from a Christian faith, the only way I can describe it is, and how I actually processed it at the time was, there's a story of Samuel in the Bible, who was a young boy who hears the voice of God and runs to his daddy priest, guardian at the time, Levi, and it's like, was that you? Did you call me? And Levi's like, go back to bed. I didn't call you. Like, and Samuel comes again. He says, no, seriously, like, I hear somebody. Did you call me? I think the third time the priest was like, oh, whoa. I think God might be speaking to this kid. Like, if it happens again, like, go back in bed and just say, yes, Lord, here I am, or something like that.
Yeah.
And so I very, very clearly, I heard a voice that I couldn't hear with my own ears speak directly in the deepest part of myself that I can fathom. And it was very simply this. It says, Matthew, don't do it, because I have a plan for your life. And I just, I hit the floor in tears. I hadn't cried all throughout that 6 months. And I remember just all of it coming out, like that, that like deep groan, trauma release sort of cry. And I just remember like falling on my knees and I describe it as a moment of surrender. And, at that point in time with the belief system that I had, I just was like, look, I'm going to give you everything. You've saved my life. I will never be the same again. It was kind of like this, oh my goodness moment. Like, all that stuff is real.
Like come to Jesus style?
It was a come to Jesus moment where I was like, I thought these were really just stories. I never really thought about things in the spiritual realm. Even now I have a pretty clear distinction when I talk to people, and even for myself, between religion and faith. And I think that was the moment where I started having a faith.
Okay.
And having a personal relationship and a connection with, what I describe as God.
And has that evolved since?
It's evolved, but like, I still would be comfortable to categorize myself as a Christian.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
I think for some Christians, I would probably offend.
Yeah. Because they're like, the way you're talking.
Yeah.
Right.
Because I think Christianity is obviously a huge umbrella. But I...
Can you start your own church?
Oh, don't tempt me. I think I'm susceptible to be a cult leader. I think like I've basically signed like blood contracts with like my wife and my best friends. Never let me start a religious movement, because it would be dangerous for everybody. But
next best thing business.
I definitely, yeah, exactly. I definitely, I'm quite anti-religion, mainly in the Christian arena. I think religion is very dangerous. And again, I make that very clear distinction between religion and faith.
Yeah.
And I think even in the parameters of the Hebrew and the Christian Bible, I think we've boxed that in very, very, very strongly. And I think that it's, I was actually thinking about this morning, it's probably why I'm talking about it. I was leaving my car off at the mechanic, and I was walking down the road, and I was thinking, whenever our man-made religion stops serving people in the way that I believe God would like to serve people, you probably need to take a good look at your religion.
Yeah, they've lost a lot of numbers, right?
Yeah. Anyway, so had this spiritual experience.
I'm sorry, did you actually take the pills?
I think I took maybe
Started.
4 or 5.
Yeah.
Okay, and how many were you planning on taking?
All of them, like 50.
Wow, so
what
what just prompted you to kind of microdose?
Microdose some paracetamol. Yeah. There's probably Lemsip tablets, actually, not think about it.
Wow.
But yeah, no, it was at that point that I heard the voice, and I got on my knees, and then I don't know what I did.
So you're
I
in
might
the
have even
process-
dramatically like thrown the pills in the bin or something like
crazy,
that.
man. So you're like 5 pills in,
Yeah.
you got to dump them all.
Yeah. And the crazy thing is, I haven't talked about this for a while. It's crazy what comes back to you through different retellings. I didn't tell anybody.
Oh, jeez.
I didn't tell anybody about that until I was 16. And so I kind of had this weird diverging self at that point, where I just continued to be the same person that I was, particularly for my family.
Yeah.
And then there was this deep, rich inner life with a lot of pain and a lot of turmoil, a lot of excitement, a lot of mysticism, a lot of, spirituality that I just didn't share for.
So that was your Spider-Man.
Yeah, that was my alter ego.
Yeah,
it was dark then. And you know what's so funny, man? It is like I'm deeply influenced by superheroes, particularly Spider-Man. I love Spider-Man. I think it was because it was like that nerd who had an opportunity to take the glasses off. And I remember like, it's so like you couldn't really write it, but like around that time I got contact lenses. I remember like taking the glasses off was a real symbolic moment for me, because it was during that transition period with puberty, with the spiritual experience. And when I came back to school, I did have an opportunity to kind of reinvent myself. I remember I was always very, very shy as a child. Really would have been quite quiet, softly spoken, always been unbelievably sensitive, like really sensitive, like to the point where I would have said that I was being bullied. And on hindsight, people were just having the crack with me, and I just wasn't ready to handle it, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, but I've always been deeply curious about people. I've loved understanding people from a young age. I think it's probably the sensitivity that fuels that, you know, because you experience the whole kind of recipe of emotions. You like to see that and tap into that in other people. It's one of the reasons why I love podcasting, is because you basically have a chance to kind of pull out different little platters of emotions and explore them, or, you know, story arcs. And I love relating to people and seeing myself in their story and seeing mine in theirs and all that sort of stuff. But I came back and I remember choosing confidence. I went on a family holiday that summer to, goodness, I think Salou in Spain. And it's like, you know, it was like an American teen movie where you've got all the young people at the hotel and everybody's trying to get with each other and everyone's starting to like to try to like steal drink from their parents. But I just remember like going there and just choosing to be a really confident person who didn't mind going up to people and chatting with them and introducing myself. And that's really where I kind of found this other part of myself.
And how old are you then?
Like probably 12, you know.
Okay.
And
so you already were playing with the idea of shifting your identity.
Yeah. And it really was, that word playing is really, that's a cool word that you threw out there. Because that's, for me, that's what it felt like. It felt like a game. And I like I said, I was a major gamer, but I just felt like I was surprised at the possibility that I could just go up to a complete stranger and just talk to them. And it felt like I was experimenting with this new dark art. You know what I mean? Like this new form of magic that I've never experienced before. And 9 times out of 10, it worked amazingly. You know, I remember on a different trip, probably 5 years later, I remember like, because I enjoyed that experience so much, like first night on the holiday in the hotel, like walking up to like a group of probably like 15, 16-year-olds and just sitting in the middle of them and not saying anything and waiting for them to turn on and being like, you all right? And I made like some really, really, really great friends through that time. Anyway, package all that up. I really started to come out of my shell. But again, still had this very kind of like inner hidden life. Was really addicted to pornography. Was definitely, like, if you were going to classify me, like I would have been chronically addicted to video gaming as well. I think, I don't know if we talked before, but
we covered
I've
a little
put
bit
into my
about
10,000 hours, you know,
Wow.
easily, like just in that kind of teenage period. And then alongside that, I think a lot of people with chronic fatigue syndrome experience this. I would kind of fall into this rut of like 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. I would be this super confident Spider-Man for 2 weeks. I would be in school. I would be life and soul. I would be having a great time. And then I would get like a chest infection. I'd be lying in bed for 2 weeks.
Wow.
And I bounced between that, honestly, for the next kind of 5 years. And it would be on top of the world, feeling amazing, to then being at rock bottom, super depressed, by myself, not wanting to talk to anybody, pushing everyone out of my life, parents included. And that was my reality for those 5 years. So there was those two very conflicting selves.
Right.
There was zero integration between the two.
Okay. So obviously you've been working with a lot of experts, having experts on your podcast around mental health,
Yep.
scientists, whatnot, you know, counselors. What is going on based on those experts that you spoke to
Yeah.
regarding to that, like, sort of manic depressive roller coaster ride?
Sure, yeah. There's a lot of different answers I have to this. My whole life I've been looking for the answer. And I think at this stage, I'm still pretty young, I'm 27, but I think I've just realized there is no one answer. I think it's a combination of lots of different things. My working theory as such, and it changes and it evolves and it adds and removes quite frequently, is something to do with the inflammatory response in the body. If you look at the depressed brain, it's always an inflamed brain. There's a lot of talk about inflammation in lots of different circles. That seems to be the most consistent thread that I can see in my own life, is something to do with inflammation. So I would get physically sick, something like a chest infection, and my body would have an overblown response to that sickness that would lead to some sort of depression. Now, the whole manic depressive bipolar piece is where I'm a little bit less schooled in, but I'm wondering if in that season of my life, is that what caused bipolar? There's a professor I love, Stephen Lardy, and he talks about how you have physical ruts in your brain, and the more times you do something, the more deep and defined
Ingrained.
those grooves become. And so I wonder if in some ways I was indirectly training my brain
Yeah, reinforcing.
to have two modes, super on
Yeah,
and
super
super
off.
off.
Right, and they both fed into each other.
Yeah. And so, it's interesting now, again, the term bipolar only came into my life 2 years ago, which is really interesting. And that's opened up a whole different kind of realm of exploration for me. But like you said, I do think they're linked. And a lot of kind of like bipolar literature and kind of community would say, like, what goes up must come down. And there does seem to be a pretty solid trend between the highs and the lows. And one of the kind of like underspoken parts of bipolar is if you want to manage the lows, one of the best ways to do that is manage the highs. And so, but you're a teenager, every teenager wants to suck as much marrow out of life as possible,
Yes.
They want to carpe the diems, my friend jokes. And so I would just push really hard to get the high as much as possible, and then just, okay, if I crash and burn, I crash and burn. I also think there's a lot in there, and this is like a slightly different answer, I think there's a lot in there about just like the programming we receive as young high achievers. I've always been really academic. It's just something that came naturally to me. Never studied, was a terrible student, and was just straight A's. It just comes to me. I have an audio memory, and I can just remember. I'd be sitting in the exam, and I remember the class. I wasn't even listening to the teacher, but somewhere in the back of my head, I remember like, oh yeah, this is what they said about the cell membrane, like blah, 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 blah. Naturally gravitated towards English and subjects like that, history, where you've got a little more grey area that you can play with. It's not as defined, black and white answers, so I found myself there, and obviously, I would remember quotes and passages really, really easily. But I know I was put on like a grammar stream over here, which is like they're very focused on like you need to become a doctor and a lawyer, that sort of stuff.
Right.
And I think that like high performing, constantly reach for the stars, get your self-worth from your success, also fed into it.
Okay.
Because, and I can only say that because I've only started to experience true healing in the last few years, and I think it's something to do with finding and living in that middle space. Finding that contentment, not pushing yourself to 110% in every single area of your life, every single day for 3 years straight. The whole topic of burnout, I think, is really interconnected with depression and bipolar as well.
Yeah.
Because anecdotally, I've just found that the slower I go, the more relaxed I become, the more unhurried I am, the less busy I am, the healthier I am, both physically and mentally. So I do think that there was a lot of that in there. And that's probably what my 16 to early 20s journey was. It was battling with the demon of success and the demon of, that constant burnout trajectory where it was push, crash. Oh crap, why have we crashed? This isn't part of the plan. Quickly, get the engines back up again so we can go back to space,
Right.
Yep.
So at what point were you managing just a little bit over time, or by the time you hit your 20s, you started the podcast? Was this where you started to really find yourself, find your feet?
Yeah, so the kind of next big milestone in the journey was at 16. So I had kind of this the second come to Jesus moment, okay, where those 5 years between 11 and 16, I kind of just forgot about it. It just kind of was you have that moment you're like, you've saved me, I'll give my everything to you. And then like kind of, you know, like 3 months later, you're just kind of like, I'm just going to do things my way, you know?
Yeah.
And I remember the guy in front of me in maths class, a guy called Steve, he turned around to me one day and he was like, do you want to go to Germany over summer? And I was like, what's in Germany? And he goes, there's this big conference, it's called Teen Street, you'll love it. And I was like, give me more. And he goes, honestly, there's girls from every country. The France, Italy, there's like 2,000 young people there. And I was like, dude, say no more. Why did you not open with that? So we all...
Now you tell me.
Yeah, we all hopped on a bus. There's probably like, I'm going to say there was about 100 of us, 2 buses. And we drove 30 hours to Germany, this place called Offenburg. Really cute, quaint, old little town. And then just like in the middle of like, was it a football stadium or a basketball stadium or something? They had this huge conference for teenagers. And, you know, that experience was so profound for me because I had a couple of really key moments there. One of them was we had this like simulation, I guess would be the best way to describe it, like dramatic acting experience where, okay, think of like a haunted house with paid actors. You go in and the actors are part of the thing. We had something like that around the topic of human trafficking, right?
Wow.
So we had to like consent to everything, and then we were put in this room and we were like, these guys stormed in and like blindfolded us,
Wow.
threw us in the back of a van,
Jeez.
and then took us to a brothel. And it was all like very, very realistic, like needles on the ground, like, you know, these incredible actors pretending to be like, you know, high out of their mind on heroin and stuff. And we would sit down and we were just dropped in the room, no cues, no nothing. And you were like in the room exploring. We started talking to, you know, the prostitute or whatever, and she starts telling her story. And, you know, I think we were in India or something like that. And I remember coming out of that and just like having the fabric of my world unraveled, and really strongly just felt this deep injustice, this deep desire to go, and probably a lot of Messiah complex in there as well. Okay, let's be honest about it. Like, how can I live my life now knowing that this stuff exists?
Yeah.
And this was part of that conference.
yeah. It's part of this conference.
We meet all these hot chicks from all over the world.
Yeah, and so I remember like we were taken and we had like a debrief with like a professional afterwards, and they basically walked us through stuff. And I just remember at that point, like I was like, when I grew up, I want to like be the people that like go and like bust the doors down and like rescue the people and blah 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 blah. It was really into, you know, human trafficking and all that stuff afterwards. But I think the key takeaway from that was felt a real deep-seated call to go overseas, particularly in that like missional context. And so that was one of the experiences. The other experience was kind of like another spiritual moment where I think it was a night of worship where, you know, everyone was just letting go. We were singing songs, we were raising the hands, we were doing all this stuff. And I just, again, this really, really soft voice just being like, well, how's the last 5 years been for you? I remember being like, not so great. And I remember, you know, the same sort of voice saying like, yeah, I've seen that. I see you've been trying to do it your way, and that's cool. That's fine. But I just want to ask you, do you want to continue doing it your way, or would you like to go my way? And it was like a real crossroads moment. And I remember just like, again, in that moment of just like complete surrender, I was like, I'm going to do it your way because my way's just not working for me. That was the second experience. And the third experience, which really actually out of all of them was subtly the most profound of them all, is I started talking to people. So this guy, Steve, who invited me, we really, really connected. And there was 3 or 4 other guys on that trip. And actually, just like a big shout out to, like, you know, these grown men, leaders, who drove us out there, who slept in tents with us, you know, the biggest tent I've ever seen in my life. There's probably like 1,000 people inside, and I mean, some hilarious stories. You can imagine getting a bunch of 16-year-old
Yeah, it
guys.
sounds like pre-Burning Man.
Yeah, it pretty much is. Like, it was wild. And
Yeah, I mean,
we were-
Burning Man's at that time,
it
but
was
this is like
hilarious.
a Christian version.
But like, you know,
is it Christian?
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Okay.
Like those guys, they gave up a whole week of their lives, and they were just, the only reason they were there was basically to listen to us, you know. And it was the first time in my life I ever opened up about my mental health. First time I ever opened up about pornography. And this amazing thing happens, which, you know, in hindsight now, you know it's going to happen, but there was the, yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Oh my
Wow,
goodness.
okay.
I can't believe you've said that. I've kept the secret for 5 years.
Okay.
I felt like a freak. I felt like the worst person ever.
But this sounds like a real legit like institution where it's real. You know, people are not just buttering things up or sweeping under the carpet,
yeah.
like a lot of these organizations.
Sure, but a lot of it was kind of like, I can't think of any other word other than grassroots. This was the unofficial part of the
Okay, and so
program.
this was like maybe like a young,
This was,
like,
so we were kind of like in a group of like 6 people,
Mm-hmm.
1 or 2 male leaders and the rest kind of guys your own age. And the older leaders, they were basically just facilitators. And a lot of the time they just literally got out of the way and let us do our thing.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
the relationships I made there and tapping into that honesty was probably the biggest game changer out of them all.
yeah, the point I was getting at is the fact that the organization had adapted to the times.
Yeah.
And, you know, was talking about real world issues.
Oh yeah, yeah.
You know?
Oh, dude. So yeah, to your point, like there was seminars that you could go to. I remember going to a seminar, and the guy literally, I don't know what, we were kind of clickbaited into it, because then he just started the seminar and he goes, okay, who here watches porn? And everyone was like, whoa, no, you can't say that. Like, you know, we're like hyper religious people.
Yeah,
like
Christian,
you can't
yeah.
ask us
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
And he was just so like
Direct.
and he was direct, and he was more of like a scientist, like wasn't really an empath, like didn't really have a lot of like good people.
He was just objective.
He was like,
Yeah.
here's the facts.
Yeah.
He's like, this is how many people are watching online. This is how many under 13-year-olds are watching online.
Wow.
This is some of the early signs coming out of how it's, and he's basically just like, look, like, I know this is affecting you guys. Like, let's talk about it. And no one said anything. You know, no one raised a hand. No one engaged. Everyone like. But I think that in some ways it set the table to allow us to have that really awkward 16-year-old shy experience where you're like, so like, what did you think about what that guy was saying? Do you know what I mean?
Right. But usually it'd be, at least in my experience, it was older guys would be like, oh yeah, I would jerk off all the time.
Yeah,
and you're
yeah.
like, you guys jerk off?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're like, don't you? And I'm like,
Yeah.
I do
Yeah.
jerk. You jerk off. Yeah. Oh, everybody's oh, like, it's like a big party,
Exactly.
right? Like a coming out thing.
Yeah, so whenever that, you know, the cat was out of the bag, so to speak, what that did for us was it gave us an intimacy in our relationships. It fast-tracked intimacy whenever you kind of have that. And the only thing I can relate it to, and I feel like sometimes I feel a little bit inappropriate when I say this, but it felt like the same level of connection that like guys in AA have with each other.
Yeah.
You know, you're just straight in there
Yeah.
because all the other stuff just falls away. You're totally having a human connection with somebody. And that overflowed into like a bit of a movement within our circles. You know, we came home and annoyingly so, we just started asking everybody, like, do you watch porn? Like, you know, is this something that you feel like you would like to stop in your life as well? And that's the key, you know, like we just felt on a gut level that we don't want this. We felt trapped. We felt like this is something that we have no control over, and that makes us feel weird. And so that level of intimacy spiraled into just like a really amazing friendship group and a wider circle that would meet really regularly and just talk about the real things of life, you know, divorced parents, depression, other types of addictions, how you're feeling, you know, just the nitty-gritty real stuff of life. And again, it's funny, like I see like the early seeds of podcasting in there as well.
Yeah.
It's talking about the shadow. It's getting in touch with the
Yeah,
shadow.
I was gonna say that you were pretty much, you know, isolated in your
Yeah.
own dark cave.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was like a coming out moment for a lot of people. And you know, those are the guys that walk me down the aisle. You know, those are the
Love it.
guys that hold my baby daughter in their arms. They're the guys that I see at least once a week, and they're you know, they're the other hobbits on the journey. And so that was the greatest gift of all that. And then just that moment where it's like, what way are you going to go? You know, I obviously had the grades to do anything I wanted. That kind of set me on the path of that like social justice world. So thought I was going to be a social worker, and spent 3 years overseas in like a missional context where we were working with drug addicts and homeless communities and guys who had lost everything in earthquakes and rural parts of Africa, the whole kind of smorgasbord. I can't really say that word.
I like that word, though.
Yeah, it's a great word, isn't it?
Smorgasbord.
Yeah.
I go smorgasbord. Add a little bit in.
And it allowed me to experience a lot of things in a short space of time.
Yeah.
And again,
because you're very worldly for your age, too,
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, you were a mature 11-year-old.
Yeah.
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 But you've gone through so much.
Yeah. I think it's experiences that mature you rather than the years. I had an old Scottish pastor whenever I was a boy, and in his language he would be like, I've met lots of people who say they've been Christians for 60 years old, and the truth is they've just been 1-year-old Christians for 60 years.
That is so
Isn't that so applicable to all parts of
absolutely.
life? And then you have people who have maybe only, in his language, have only been a Christian, for 5 years, but they're 5 years old. They've had that maturity. They've had those experiences. They've had that progression through some sort of a journey. And a lot of us, we've all been there in different seasons of our life. You just stay put. You stay stuck. And when you stay stuck, you don't move. And often you can't progress to the next level. You can't go on the next journey until you've finished.
Finish that level.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then, of course, new level, new devil, or, every level comes with a bigger boss.
The thing that comes to me is the cross between vulnerability and courage. So it seemed like whether it's somebody admitting in public that they chronically masturbate, or watch porn or whatever, it's like it takes like one person to go ahead and like speak up about it.
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh, okay, well, shoot, I'm not the only one.
Yeah.
And then,
It's interesting, like, actually one of my life mottos is always go first. And it's interesting, like, even from everything, like from a vulnerability perspective to a social perspective.
You see that all the time.
Yeah, I always operate with, and I always operate with, like, you have to be the one to go first.
Right.
So I don't wait for anyone to invite me over. Maybe we've had someone over for dinner like 3 times. I'm just like, I don't need to wait for them to, it's their turn now. It's like, no, always go first. And that's just like, it's a mentality that's really served me. And like, and I genuinely mean this, it's served the projects, the movements, the things that I've been involved in.
Leading.
Yeah, it's a form of leadership. And actually, I've had some really interesting language recently come into my life. It's been this word facilitation.
Yeah, or
And actually,
initiator.
if I think about who I am, I'm actually a facilitator.
Yeah.
And I'm not a leader in the classic sense. Like we were talking about off mic, I'm not a CEO. I'm not a type A. I don't have the resilience to be like a Churchill. I would be in bed by like day 3. That's not me.
You're not the general.
I'm not the general. That's good. I might write that down, actually. Give me a second. Not the general. It's why I love podcasts.
Well, that's funny because, when you see people in a group situation, they invite someone to speak up, you see people like kind of look around all the time, right?
Yeah.
And it's usually like the one person that just steps up to the plate.
Yeah, so it's facilitation. Like, there's a lovely kind of phrase. I interviewed like a hospitality mogul over here. He's not, he's very, very businessy, but he said the most poetic thing. He works in hospitality. He owns half of Belfast. And he said, I was like, why are you into hospitality? And he says, because hospitality sets the stage for people to live their lives. And he says, I get to be a part of that. And for me, actually, what I love is I love setting the table for other people. There's definitely been times in my life where I've had to work through being chronically in that mode of servitude and not finding your own space or standing up to take your own place or stand up for yourself or your own boundaries or whatever. I think I've been on that journey in a pretty significant way. But now I'm on the other side of that. It's even more powerful because I choose to set the table for other people, and I genuinely get a real kick out of it. There was other times where I kind of was doing it even whenever I didn't want to, or I felt pressured into doing it, or I was violating my own boundaries or my own conscience in doing so. And that was the big journey of my overseas, my big takeaway of my overseas experience was learning to find my own limits.
Yeah.
Because I would just give it all, because I thought that's what a good Christian boy is supposed to do. You know, I was like, what would Jesus do?
And did you get the kissing disease again?
I just got like, you know, I definitely experienced burnout.
Yeah.
You know, in different forms and at some points in quite significant ways. But that was a really beautiful experience to realize. Again, it's like, I'll fast track this whole segment by saying, do you know the story of Michelangelo and David, the statue? You ever heard this?
Just chiseling away.
Yeah.
and-
Yeah.
So he was interviewed, and he goes, "How did you make?"
It was already there,
such a
yeah.
beautiful statue. Yeah, and he said, "Oh, I just chipped away all the parts that weren't David."
Yeah.
And I feel like those years of my life in particular, but to be honest, every day, I'm just chipping away the parts that aren't me.
It's beautiful.
I love that.
And
The masterpiece.
yeah, because it's already there.
Yeah.
Do you know? Mm-hmm. And that, I feel like I've lost so much of that striving that I carried. And I feel like I am more comfortable in my own skin than I've ever been. And just really in a compassionate, non-judgmental
You've been down to
way.
like the package down there.
Chiseling away. It's like, oh,
Chiseling.
there's the 8-pack. I'm like,
The
"Ooh, you got
8-pack
eight-pack
going a little
bit more
lower.
defined."
Get to choose your package down
choose-
down below there.
Your own adventure, you know? But yeah, like it's, I think that's the core focus now of, I don't know if you want to call it personal development or self-care, but it's, what parts of this domain in my life am I operating, or am I playing a character that's not really me, you know? And back to the depression thing, I am a guy that subscribes primarily to biological causes and treatments of depression. So, for example, you know, the guy that I'm, and my business partner, Stephen O'Lardy, he wrote a book called The Depression Cure, and his big thing is depression is a disease of civilization. So his whole thesis is basically, if you live the way your great-great-great-grandmother did, 90% of you wouldn't be depressed. You know, if you ate right, slept right, moved right, breathed right, were in nature, were connected with community the way that we're designed to be, got your 8 hours of sleep, didn't live such stressed lives, you're pretty much going to be 90% of the way there. So that's kind of my foundation, and I believe that pretty strongly. I do think there is this kind of other 10%, and Jim Carrey's got a great quote on it. He says, depression is your body refusing to play the character that you're forcing it to play. And I do think there is something really significant in that as well.
Yeah.
And I'm definitely not there 100%. I don't think you can ever be. But even in recent years, I find myself just refusing to play a character that isn't who I am.
Was there a shift in that like scale balance though, where you were teetering and then it poof went on to like the more side where there was less resistance to being hospitable to people and actually taking the initiative to facilitate, you know, hospitality? Was there a point in your, you know, travels where you're doing the mission work? Did you feel something where you were less resistant, like a graduation or something, like a moment?
Yeah, so I would say that the openness, the servitude, the hospitality, the setting the table, that's always just been easy for me. It's always been the bread and butter. The bit that's been hard for me is saying no.
No. Yeah.
The
Putting
bit-
your own boundaries.
Yeah, it's been boundaries.
Yeah.
And so, you know, there's a story in the Old Testament about the Israelites wandering around the desert for 40 years, and I think like a lot of years have just been wandering around like in a circle, like not completing the journey. It's like you're stuck in this limbo until you learn how to say no. And I think my graduation was starting to use the 2-letter word NO more frequently in my life.
Okay.
And it wasn't like a big wham bam. I can tell you kind of like significant milestones along the way. It sounds simple, but like actually the book Essentialism, I don't know if you've ever read it.
Oh yeah, I heard about that.
Essentialism by
Yeah,
Greg McKeown.
Just like again chipping away.
Yeah, so his whole thing is choosing less but better. And that set me off on a pretty significant journey that I kind of refer to as like pursuing the deep instead of the wide. And so kind of like the big kind of like razzle dazzle moments in that journey would have been like, you know, coming off social media entirely, completely redefining my work life, being really focused on the types of work that I do. You know, I was doing marketing, I was doing social media management, I was doing copywriting, I was studying in university, I was doing podcasting, and really just saying, no, like, let's go deep, not wide. In my personal life, culling a lot of relationships, particularly relationships that didn't honor boundaries, relationships that didn't fill me up, and creating a very clear distinction of this is how I serve the world, and these are the relationships where it's just 100% give and I don't expect anything back, and these are relationships where I actually get something from, and I'm going to prioritize them as well because they are my lifeblood. They are the things that allow me to do the other bits. And so slowly but surely, like we used to have a men's group that would meet in Ormo Baths, a little bit AA style. We would meet and just be like, so like, you know, what's been good, bad and ugly in your week? And people would just bare their souls, and it was really beautiful. There was a guy there, and in Lord of the Rings, at the very start of the Fellowship of the Ring, like Sauron, the big baddie, he's got this huge flail, and he like, there's this moment where he like swings it and he knocks like 30 people back, and we made a gif of that, and we call it the no flail. And so like anytime like no, it's like there's 30 people asking you to come to an event, and then you know someone would put in the group, it's like, dude, just exercise the no flail today.
Right.
And but it is like a muscle, and I say no like probably like to like 9 times out of 10 things in my life now, and I'm super comfortable doing it.
Yep.
Or I'm human, you know, like I overextend myself with commitments, with things, and I'm so comfortable now just bowing out. I'm not being worried about what people think, because I would, you know, oh no, like what about my integrity? Like what about this? Like what about that? And I'm like, dude, like it was prioritizing. Like it's just a cliche. It's like putting your own mask on first, you know, on a plane, and realizing that if you don't do that, it's just not going to work.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, like even like redefining my faith. I don't really like that phrase. Let me take that back. Rediscovering who Jesus actually was, and reading the same stories I read my whole life, and starting to understand a little bit more of the truth of them. And like the amount of times Jesus said no is startling. I read an amazing book recently called The Overload Syndrome. This is actually a funny story. I read this book when I was 16. I found it in a charity shop when I was searching for a bow tie for a formal. And I picked it up. It's an ugly cover. It's not an attractive looking book. And I picked it up and I devoured it. I think it was written in like 1994.
It's a cool title.
Yeah. And it was this doctor who like prophetically was warning us about the dangers of beepers and email and home computers and what he thinks it's going to do to society.
All the pings.
Yeah, all the pings, and how, you know, he talks about like what busy, overloaded lives people are living in the 80s, and you read it and you laugh at it now, because it's no compare. Like a mom of 2 kids, a stay-at-home mom of 2 kids even, is living like their plate is as full as like a executive banker in the 60s. Do you know what I mean? Like it's crazy the lives that we live. And he was seeing people coming in who were experiencing all sorts of diseases, you name it, blah 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 blah. But he says, you know, that's just a symptom. What you're really experiencing is overload syndrome. It's like you have no margin. You're completely depleted. Your stress levels are through the roof. You've no space in your life to be human. So I read that book, really set me on a path to where I am today, even with technology and boundaries I have in place with the digital world. And I gave that book to one of my best friends, and he gave it back to me last month.
Wow.
He was clearing out his cupboard and he says, mate, I think you gave this to me like when we were teenagers. And I reread it. Dude, it was a timely word for me. It's all about limits. And it's all about the theology of human limits. and how God designed humans with limits. He says you cannot get away from that, and we all try to live these limitless lives. And he talks about how different people have got different limits. Kind of back to the conversation. Some people they're cut out to be a CEO. Some people are generals, right?
Right.
And we need them.
Yeah.
And we need them to step up and take their place in society and lead us
They
to
have like that
war.
sort of propensity, like natural capacity for
the capacity for it. Like,
Yeah.
you know, without the generals, like, we wouldn't have jobs to go to. Do you know what I mean? Like, they play such an important role in society. But he talks about how different people have got different limits. And he starts talking about Jesus. And oh my goodness, like, shows you time and time again of Jesus saying no, Jesus removing himself from situations, Jesus actually like sending his mom away because he doesn't want to talk to her, and, you know, and you're like, oh, how have I never seen this?
Exactly. It's so there, isn't it?
Yeah, it's there, and you know.
By the way, you're talking to Jesus right now.
Some people say, literally they've stopped their car and they're like, oh my goodness, it's Jesus.
Do you know what? Like, it would be way better if like your image was in the Sunday school stories instead of this like Caucasian, like American white Jesus. You're like, dude,
blue
what are we doing
eyes,
here?
yeah,
I mean,
blonde hair.
You're not exactly Hebrew looking, but it would be at least a step in the right direction.
Dark.
Yeah, exactly. And but you know, even just simple things like, dude, like Jesus didn't heal everybody in Israel. He frequently walked past people who needed help. He frequently turned away people, and it was just so refreshing. You know?
You saw that? You reread that in the Bible?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But I wonder as well, that's the discernment as well, because not everybody wants to be healed. Not everybody wants to
Oh,
have.
dude,
They're
now,
not
now
ready.
you're preaching.
But it's so true, though. Do you know what I mean? Because
Well, there's
it's
that
like,
story where he literally asked the person, "Do you want to be healed?"
Exactly.
I always was like, "What type of a question is that?" And then you know, like you say, you get to this age and you're like, "Oh, people don't actually want to be healed. They don't want to change."
Because it's such a shift and a
Yeah.
change in your identity.
Yeah.
I was listening to a podcast today with Shane Flynn. Jeez, you got to listen.
Really? Yeah.
So good, so good. And he was explaining all about, you know, you've got, you know, the different clients that were coming to him with chronic pain, injuries, chronic illnesses, etc., and how he's kind of broken them down into like kind of 3 sets of people that are coming. Heavy on the cortisol, heavy on the adrenaline, or angry.
Interesting.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah.
Like, it was like amazingly good, because I was like, oh, right, okay, clearly I'm a cortisol junkie with quite a bit of anger in there.
Yeah.
And I was feeling so elated, and then I just nosedived. I just felt so depressed, because it was just like, I've got such a mountain to climb
Yeah.
to not go through
Yeah.
this shit cycle that I
Absolutely.
keep going through, because
Yeah.
it's just so ingrained in there.
It is.
And it's like,
It's like an operating system.
exactly, and it's like, now I'm looking at it, and it's like, I can see what needs to be done. Mm-hmm. And it was super clear and so enlightening.
Yeah.
But it's like, got some work to put in here.
Absolutely.
Because
Well-
those boundaries, those looking after myself, I mean, I was always the server, always to my detriment.
Yeah.
The times I got sick because I was looking after everybody
Yeah.
else, never looking after myself. And like all that putting in boundaries, I'm only figuring that out now. And I like love it that you're pretty much there. And I'm
Yeah.
thinking,
Yeah.
oh, so much
Similar
more
journey.
ahead.
What would you give that reference to in terms of the gif with the fella that's like the badass, just throwing the flog and hitting 30 like people and knocking them all over? What kind of like word would you give for that in your operating system, like a tool? What would you say? Could it seem like a version of like a code upgrade that now you have that you can refer to in the moments where you come across someone asking for something of you, and you're just like, I don't have that capacity, and then you just in your mind have the flog, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
you could just knock a bunch of things out of your life that's unessential.
Yeah, totally.
Do you have like a specific, even like you know, a shit where you got that download? Was there something that you felt upgraded, or you know, like it was interesting to see for me when people are different from one moment to the next, because they do have that aha moment. But it's not just, again, as we talked about in prior episodes, it's not a state change. It's literally a graduation to a new stage of development where you can't even go back there to that old version of you.
I, I think, like, just a kind of visual response that I have to that is, it's a little bit like when you start, say, training yourself with push-ups, and you start off and you can do 3 push-ups, and then you keep training, and then like 3 months later you can do 10 push-ups, and then 2 years later you can do like 20 push-ups, and then 5 years later you're banging out like 50 push-ups. And it is gradual, but then all of a sudden you have this moment where you're like, oh my goodness, I can do 30 push-ups. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
So like in the day-to-day, in the decision by decision, you don't really notice that you're getting stronger. You're saying no to this, you're saying no to that, you're learning to honor different commitments. And then you realize over time, you're like, I'm getting really good at this. And when I say good, I mean, I'm getting really comfortable with this. Because for a lot of times at the start, you would say no and you would feel so guilty. And you would feel the shame. And it would come to you. And so you've done the right thing, but you feel terrible about it.
But did you get a lot of backlash from it? Because I've got some serious backlash.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's learning to be comfortable with the backlash as well. I've read an amazing book on boundaries. I think it's actually just called Boundaries. And they talk about, like, what are boundaries? Boundaries are the kind of fences around your property, okay? So you have your property, I have my property, you have your property. And so what's inside my property is my business. So you'll invite me to come to your barbecue next Thursday, and I'll say to you, oh, Tony, thank you so much for the offer, but Thursday is actually date night. You can set your house on fire. You can smash things. You can go crazy. You can get on your yard and scream at the top of your lungs. That's not on my property. That's all to do with you. And learning to realize where I begin and where I end and where you begin is so crazy, because I'm not responsible for people's reactions. And ultimately, 9 times out of 10, people are looking for you to do something for them.
Yeah.
So there's no obligation, like anything that you give is a gift, and it should be received as such. There's relationships in your life where there's actual commitment and there is give and take, and that's important to have too. But I can't have that with like a random podcast listener or an old client or an old friend. Like, we need to give each other permission to say no as well. And that's, I think, part of the big journey for me is it's the classic, like, do to others as you would have them do to you. Learning to manage your own reaction to when people say no to you is really helpful in your own journey. I think something weird going on there I don't really have language for, but
yeah, it's interesting with maybe, I don't know if it's I guess it's worldwide, but that like crab in the bucket mentality, where you're trying to get out of it into some new version of yourself or a vision that you have, and people around you just like the old you. They don't like you changing, and so you talked about having like a calling happening where you decided who you wanted to hang out with, but there was also a calling where maybe people didn't really want to hang out with you anymore, right?
Oh, like, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Was there a period where you felt sad because you maybe you thought these people in particular were going to be on your path, and it turns out a lot of them just fell off to the wayside and you just felt lonely for a while? Because there's also that. Yeah,
for sure. There's been tremendous loss. There's no other way to describe it. Like, there's been some, like, the most core relationships you can imagine, some of them have fallen by the wayside on the journey. And there is genuine grief. You genuinely mourn those relationships. And some of those relationships, the way they currently stand, they look like there's no real way back, And I am an optimist. Anything can happen. And I believe that
your door is always open.
Yeah, the door's open.
And
anything can happen. And maybe it'll take 5 years, maybe it'll take 10 years. You don't know.
Yeah.
So there's genuine grief there. And I want to say that before I say what's next, because I think it's easy to say the next bit and sound really cocky and egotistical and I don't give a damn. That's not true. But there is this kind of like other side to it where it also shows you who the real ones are.
Right.
Right. And part of it is I do also genuinely take a certain level of responsibility, because if I've been projecting a false self to somebody for 10 years and then I tap into my true self, in some ways the other person has a right to be pissed off, because they're like, why you been lying to me for 10 years, bro? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
I never thought about it that way.
Yeah, like
that's brilliant.
There's a lovely phrase called, I don't even know where this comes from, No, I won't be able to get it. I'll just say it anyway. The guy said, like, it's really important to set your stall out early. And he was talking about it particularly with faith. So he's like, if you're like, if faith is so important to you and you like go to church all the time and you're like, faith, Jesus, and you work with somebody for 7 years and then 7 years later, you kind of accidentally let it slip that you're like Christian, they're kind of going to be a little bit pissed because they're like, dude, like, I feel betrayed here. Even if I hate Christianity and I think you're the dumbest person in the world, I kind of feel like you've deceived me here, bro. And I think that there's a lot of overlap there for lots of other areas in our lives, you know. And so I think the truer you can be, the faster you can set out your stall. It's integrity, you know. I had an old manager, learned so much from him, and he said, integrity is not about being faultless. He says integrity is about being falseless. He says it's not about being perfect, it's just about being honest. And I think revealing those parts of you sooner, whether it's the boundaries, it's just going to be beneficial. You know, like now I am a terrible digital communicator. You know, I don't respond to emails. I don't respond to you know, messages for maybe days or weeks at a time. And I've actually learned to put things in place like autoresponders, or even if I meet new people, I'm like, look, by the way, if you really need me, call me on my brick phone. This is the number, because I just want to be clear about the expectations up front. Or I mightn't get back to you for a while. It doesn't mean that I don't love you. So kind of getting ahead of it a little bit and being upfront with people also is a way to kind of like avoid unnecessary like road bumps as well, you know. Like I think there's a little bit of a culture where
or
it's kind of
assumptions on their end.
Yeah,
you know,
like
this
it's just
guy's
like
a dick.
open communication.
Yeah.
Instead of like, there's kind of like a little bit of like this toxic culture, even in the like minimalism movement, where it's just kind of like, well, that's just who I am, and you just have to accept it, and like that. And that is true, but like you can at least like guide people a little bit along that, as opposed to like intentionally giving them like brick walls to hit against. Do you know?
Yeah. Interesting. Any thoughts there, Judy?
It was making me think about a book that I'm recently been listening to on Audible called 4,000 Weeks. You read it?
This is
So
Walter
good.
or somebody, or he's
I want to say Oliver, but I can grab my
Oliver
phone.
Berkman?
Maybe.
It's on my, I think it's on my
good.
reading
It's
list.
like one of the top books right now on
It's
Amazon or something.
Brilliant. And do you know what the 4,000 Weeks stands for?
It's your working life.
No, your actual
Your
life.
actual life?
Your actual life.
Oh my goodness.
It's like pretty much that's what you're dealing with. Maybe a little bit less, maybe a little bit more. And he isn't like right at the start. He's kind of like, well, let's say you live to like maybe longer. Maybe you live to like 85. So you've only got, and then it'll go 4,000 weeks. And you're like, geez, that sounds like nothing.
Yeah.
Because it can just go like that.
Yep.
And he was saying so many things that you were saying basically about, basically my life is saying no now to 90+% of all the opportunities, because ultimately you can't do everything.
No, you can't.
You'll never do everything.
No.
You'll never master all the emails that come through. You'll never master all the expectations other people have of you. You'll never master all of that. It just will never happen. You can't do it. Accept defeat.
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah.
And it was just like so refreshing to hear it. And I'm like, of course. And it's interesting as well because like my background was so kind of like full on, you know, very abusive, very violent. I didn't understand so many basic things about social cues and social responsibilities and boundaries and other people's feelings, and that wasn't my responsibility, and that, you know, all of these things. There's so much that I'm still kind of figuring out now, and hearing this in this book, I'm like, geez, everybody needs to listen to this. Because there's so many ways that you've always thought time management and multitasking and and it's like, that's just killing everybody. It's killing everybody. I mean, and just making everybody so sick, and it's like, no wonder everybody's struggling.
Yeah. Because the limits piece, like, this is something I've been thinking a lot about recently, is, let's say, like, the average high performer works 60 hours. That's kind of like a middle of the road number. There's people that work a lot more.
A lot more, yeah.
There's people that work
80,
less.
100, yeah.
Okay. So let's play a game. Like, let's say it's 60. All right, push it harder. Let's say 70. Really push it, say 80. Say you're an absolute freak that can work 100 hours a week. there you go, you've hit your limit. Like, the difference between 70 and 100 hours a week, the difference between 50 and 70 hours, the difference between 40, you know, the difference between working 30 hours a week versus 40 hours a week.
Big difference.
Big difference. But you hit a limit no matter what. And I think as we need to kind of reprogram ourselves to set lower limits.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, because the difference between, like, and this is coming from a place of privilege, and I'm aware of it, and an idealistic world, but like, what would families look like if people worked 30 hours instead of 40 hours? And really, what are you losing on the productivity front? Not much.
Yeah.
Those extra 10 hours, you're not gaining anything ridiculous from them. But from a life perspective, you're gaining everything. Like we said earlier, what would it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul? You gain like 80 points of soul for 20 points of productivity. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like the difference between starting work or ending work at 4 o'clock versus 6 o'clock. What are you doing between 4 and 6, really?
Right.
That's the time where like people start scrolling on TikTok. Do you know what I mean? But like, what they could go and pick their kids up from school, they could go to the gym, they could drive to the beach. There's so much you can do by actually just lowering your limits, even by a small amount. And I've been thinking about that so much.
Amazing. And the ability to go deeper on those 30 hours.
Dude.
Yeah, totally.
Like pure
Absolutely.
quality,
But I think also as well, because the fulfillment then,
Yeah.
because you are there, you're present, you're focused. You're
Yeah.
like, I'm here for this time. I'm going to do my best that I can within
Yeah.
that space of time. Because leaving a job where you could never fulfill the role because it was more piled on. You got more efficient, you got more piled on.
Yeah,
more
that's the
piled on.
thing. Yeah.
It was so
Your
depressing.
efficiency gets you in trouble.
Yeah, totally. And it was so
You get
depressing.
punished for being effective.
Exactly.
Which is why I think that's why I've gravitated towards being a business owner, because your effectiveness and efficiency, you get rewarded with freedom.
Yes.
Now, that's an active choice you have to constantly fight against, because you also can be the worst boss in the world for yourself, because you can do the thing that your former employer would do, where you then just try to exchange more efficiency for more profit, and you work the same amount and whatever. But I have made a conscious decision, even actually what we were talking about off mic, about not building a big business. You know, I've made a conscious effort to always be trying to give myself a time rise or a freedom rise instead of a pay rise.
I love that.
And but that's also it's an issue of contentment, and it's okay, I'm going to drive this car instead of that car, I'm going to live in this house instead of that house.
Yeah.
Back to the whole deep not wide thing, I love the kind of Homer Greek mythology stuff about sirens, you know, in the sea, and they would sing, and then the sailors would kind of be enchanted by their song, and they would end up in the rocks. If you really look at that, it's so beautiful. Like, there's a reason why the classics are the classics. Like, the sirens would always sit on the shallow, rocky shore, and they would always pull people away from the deep. And so the siren call of our generation, it's things like success, it's things like distraction, it's things like addiction, it's things like debt, it's things that bind us and remove our freedom, and they pull us from the depth into the shallow, and that's where all the rocks are. You know?
Amazing.
And so
Stick the earwax in.
dude, the resistance to the siren's call, I think there's 3 different examples.
Strap yourself to the
Yes, you got it. Yeah.
the front of the ship.
So the first one is
With rope.
The first one is bind yourself to the mast. So that's kind of like, in Christian terms, you would probably say, like, if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off.
Yeah.
So like, if your smartphone causes you to sin, and my definition of sin is a loss of life. So if that thing pulls you away from life, then you need to cut it off. So, like, if you throw your smartphone away, you cannot check your smartphone, right? You remove the ability to choose in a scenario. You know, Odysseus, he tied himself up. He wanted to break free. He wanted to run into the siren's arms, but he couldn't because he tied himself to the mast. The second thing was, like you said, the earwax. So you quiet out the noise, right? So you remove the noise, you focused yourself in, And the third one, I think, is the most beautiful. There's another time where they were crossing and they got someone on board to pull out the lyre. You know, of course, every Greek story for some reason has a lyre. I don't even know what a lyre is. In my head, it's like a little fiddle, violin thing, harp. Yeah, right?
Yeah.
And they pulled out the lyre and someone starts playing really beautiful music. And so I think there's a lot of talk about tying yourself to the mast, throw away your smartphone, put this website blocker on, delete your social media. Those are all excellent. Like Greg McKeown, he talks about decisions that make 1,000 decisions for you, where you make one decision and it removes many other decisions. I personally don't need to worry about managing my social media usage because I don't have it.
Yeah.
You know, one big decision, boom, 1,000 dominoes have been removed from me. That's really important. That's really good. But this idea of seeking and actively building and creating music that is so beautiful and so rich that it actually outperforms the Song of the Sirens is incredible.
I love that.
That's amazing,
You know?
yeah.
And to kind of maybe bring this home a little bit, like I have found that when I am not working hard on my life outside of work, things start to get a little bit nasty. Things start to slowly kind of come apart. And if I find myself like getting into a bit of a funk in any sense of the word, it's usually because I'm not focusing on that music. I'm not focusing on getting that music to play in a way that's more appealing than the Siren's Call. You know, if I'm not curating really deep relationships with my friends, if I'm not making real intentional time for my family where I want to be with my family, whenever that shifts and I find that, you know, I can't wait to finish this social thing so I can get back to my work or get back to my addiction or get back to checking this thing, that's where things start getting completely out of whack. And like, you know, currently I'm in a season where I can't wait to finish work so I can go home, or I can't wait to be done with this screen time thing that I have to do, like an email or something, so I can go and exercise. And that's such a big shift because life's so hard. We have to use willpower so much. But if you can like flip it where you actually crave the thing that's good for you, it's just, and Matthew McConaughey I think calls that running downhill. It doesn't always have to be uphill.
Right,
You know?
Totally.
right.
And that's kind of like, I guess there's a talk there on systems and how you put things in place that make things automatic. But yeah.
Right. Where are we at on time?
That is 1 hour 17.
1 hour 17, and we were running that when you guys went to the restroom?
I
No.
don't know.
Okay.
I can't remember.
I think we have another like 10, 15 minutes, but it's up to you. Like the thing that came across my mind again is you're a beautiful example of like going the opposite direction of the masses, and whether it's just pretty much building a business without social media, even keeping business regular, like relatively smaller, manageable. Like it just seems like, again, you had that courage to go the different direction than everybody else. How has it been for you? Like what, just to help others that look to you as an example, that they don't have to do what everybody else is doing in regards to like business per se.
Yeah.
So it just seems like you work more in the, you know, analog world versus the digital. You know, it's like that it's possible to do all these things. In fact, it may be even more real to interact with people face to face and less digitally, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so kind of first response to that is there's a quote I love, and it says, if you want to live like nobody else, then you have to live like nobody else. And it's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but I really love it because so often we want the reward without change. We want the quieter schedule without people being grumpy at us for saying no. And you just can't have both, you know. Like, if you want to live a life that's a little bit countercultural, then you have to be ready to experience what it's like to swim against the stream and get a couple of rocks bumped in your face, and
get tomatoes thrown at you.
and
people like heckling you.
Absolutely. And you also need to accept less, so in the business sense, and I genuinely, I do speak from a place of privilege. I've been so blessed on the business end, and I really don't take that lightly. But without a shadow of doubt, I have chosen probably a salary of 25% of what I could get if I was really pumping, And not everybody can. Society is set up in such a way where you can't live the life that I currently live with the amount of freedom I have if you work at McDonald's. It's not possible. And that's what I mean by privilege. I have, as much as I was bashing my high performance kind of track, and even being academic and stuff, it's put me in a position that other people cannot get to easily. I remember hearing something really great around the times of Black Lives Matter, and they were talking about that racial inequality, and they said that all privilege is some people are just given a really big head start in life, and that's how I feel. I've experienced a lot of pain, a lot of difficulty, but I was naturally given. I was put halfway up the mountain in comparison to other people, and we were having this conversation recently that actually, forget about the racial or even the socio-economic aspect of that, but even in our families of origin, some of us have been put higher up the healing mountain naturally. Some of us, because of our families, no matter how much money they've had or whatever, we've had less trauma to work through. That's allowed us to have a head start in the journey. And it's funny now being a parent, a lot of my actually, even in my work, I think we've talked about this before, one of my mantras is be who you needed when you were younger. And for us, as parents, our real desire and our gift that we want to give our kids is as little trauma as possible. We know we're going to give them a lot because it's a high contact sport, and we're going to get wrong, and we have our own shadows and our own stuff that we deal with, like everybody on the planet's going to have, but we want to try and prioritize that for our own family. And so that's part of the subtitle of Essentialism is the disciplined pursuit of less. And I would say that's what the journey is. It's a disciplined pursuit of less. You're constantly working at it. Even possessions, I kind of touched on it with the cars and stuff. Again, not everyone can do this. We actively are fighting against not getting a second car. Because for us, a second car is probably, I don't know, we'll just say an extra £500 a month just to keep them as simple. That's a chunk of money. That's a chunk of money that you got to put hours and brain space and effort to pursue. The type of house we live in. Again, coming from a privileged place, I get it, but we're in an amazing position where my wife doesn't have to work, and that's a sacrifice that she's made. That's a financial sacrifice we've made as a family, but we think it's a worthy cause. We don't have a TV in our house. That's a sacrifice, but we believe it's a worthy cause. We don't have social media. We think it's a worthy cause. You miss out? Yeah, absolutely. I'm extremely out of the loop when it comes to contemporary affairs. I had a podcast guest in this morning, did you hear what happened yesterday? And I was just kind of no. You know what I mean? I actually remember when Boris Johnson became Prime Minister, I don't think I knew for 3 weeks. Which is so embarrassing. Someone that came out to me, what do you think about Boris? And I was like, who, the Mayor of London?
What about Boris now?
I have no
idea, right?
I have no idea.
He got booted out.
Did he get booted out? That's so embarrassing. Don't tell people when this was recorded. So it's constantly trade-offs. And that's what Essentialism talks about, is you're constantly making trade-offs. And it's the reality of trade-offs is you can't have it all, like you said earlier. And it's making some really tough calls. And calls that maybe make you, quote unquote, miss out on stuff. But half the time, the stuff you're missing out on is just not worth it.
You don't miss it.
I know we've said this a few times, but like, I just keep coming back to like, what would it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul? And like, if we broaden that out a little bit, like, what would it profit a man to build a podcast empire and get divorced?
Yeah.
What would it profit a man to have 10 million in a passive income fund and not have a relationship with his kids? You know, what would it profit a man to make it more simple, like go on a really fancy holiday once a year and have to work an extra month to pay for it? And it's just choosing, it's actively making those decisions, because most of us make them on autopilot. You know, I see loads of people who don't care about cars, driving really expensive cars. They couldn't care less what they drive, but they just automatically are in the dealership and they say, I have to drive a German car, it has to be this colour, it has to be this spec. Just, well, and you ask them why, and they're just like, I don't know. I have to live in this type of house. I have to live in this neighbourhood. I have to go on this holiday. And they don't actually care, you know? Like, I spend money in the places that are important to me. Like, I put a sauna in our garden.
Love it.
That's the biggest purchase I've ever made in my life. And it nearly killed me making it, because I've got a weird scarcity mindset with money that I'm trying to work through. And there's people that would look at that purchase and be like, you fool, you absolute fool. How dare you spend the money on that instead
but
of
look at your skin,
X,
man.
Y.
That's the first thing I noticed when I came back here to the studio. It's like, geez, this guy's skin.
But, you know,
I'm jealous that I'm a man.
that's a trade-off where, for me, I said, this is totally worth it. And it's proved to be worth it, you know.
Obviously.
And the business is super small. Even the podcasts are really small, you know, like, and yeah, I'm starting to ramble, so you're going to have to...
But still, though, I mean, the fact that you're still going, and it's been, what, 5 years or so?
Yeah.
Yeah, incredible.
I
And then the
think
fact
you
that...
love it.
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
still in it. I mean, what's time when you love what you're
Yeah.
doing as well,
Yeah.
you know?
It's do you know what? Like, we've always had the answers. You know, I always am thinking about, like, the turtle and the hare. And, like you said earlier, Jude, it's just like, it's been staring us in the face from we were kids. Do you know what I mean? Like, the answer is in our hands, and we're blinded that we can't even see it. I think that's the tragedy, you know, is...
But I think like, I felt like I was always taught that everybody had the answers. Do you know what I mean? It was kind of like, I suppose, very heavy on the religious front.
Yeah.
Very heavy on the religious front when we grew up. And it was very much like, you know, constantly asking Jesus into my heart because I'd sinned.
Yeah.
I just thought, it like abandoned me kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it was like literally a nightly thing of
Yeah.
doing it like for years and years and years.
I need to get saved every night.
Totally.
Yeah.
And
I actually remember a primary school teacher telling us exactly that.
Yeah.
Almost as like fire insurance. It's like, oh, you should do it just in case.
But it was so
I was
sad
like,
because
oh,
it was
what a fear, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Where's
Living
the
in that
Father's
fear
heart?
mindset.
Where is it?
Exactly, and never having like that build up of, you know, you've got this, or you know, pointing out ways of being able to be better. It was kind of just more like, well, you're awful.
Yeah.
And you're always going to be awful, and you're going to try and be like Christ, but you're never going to get there.
Yeah.
So just shut up, keep down.
Yeah.
Keep your head down. There was never any kind of like real discipleship, real encouragement, real kind of like empowerment. And I think that's the thing. Why would I trust what I have in my hand?
Yeah.
Because I've been
So
taught
true.
there is no basis for me ever to trust my intuition,
Yeah.
trust my gut,
Yeah.
trust all this kind of stuff.
Or just permission to fail.
Yes.
You know?
Oh, totally.
I had there was an old guy in my life for a really short season, and he came up to me in church one day with like he had a vision that he felt like was for me, and he came over to me and he says, "Do you know what, son? You do realize that your life and God's will for your life is not a tightrope." So back to being 11 years old, hearing the voice, "Don't do it, Matthew, because I have a plan for your life." I was like basically like hyper paranoid about finding out what this plan was, and if I felt like I wasn't directly in it, I was being a failure, like you were saying, or I was missing the mark or whatever. And he you do realize it's not a tightrope? He's like, have you ever driven up the M2? It's more like a 6-lane motorway. And he's like, there's so much room for you to go to the right and to go to the left and to be in the middle and to go up and down and left and right and still be inside that.
That's beautiful.
And that was so powerful, you know. And the other thing, he then followed up with something else. He says, I had a picture of you and you were just a big hand that was just white knuckles. He says, you don't have to white knuckle your way through life. And honestly, like, that man came into and out of my life very, very quickly. But that simple kind of like concept has radically altered my life. And that's where I think like there is so much power in the prophetic and in the spirit kind of realm, because he was tapping into something that there's no way I could have got to myself. You know, in any sort of speed, and there's no way he didn't know me, you know, like it was just totally out of the blue. But I actually wanted to come back. I was thinking about something for you when you were speaking maybe 10 minutes ago, the story of Mary and Martha, and when you were saying like you were constantly a servant. Do you know this story? No? Do you want to tell the story? Because I think it's kind of fun.
If I can get it right. But Mary and Martha, they were sisters, though, weren't they?
Yeah.
So Mary was the kind of one at the foot of Jesus, you know, listening to what he was teaching, really kind of soaking it in, having that quality time. And Martha is like killing herself doing everything else, all the housework, all the kind of things. She's just like, everything has to be perfect. Everything, Jesus is here, we have to make everything perfect. And she's like literally killing herself. And then she's like, oi, why aren't you helping out? You know, what are you doing? Kind of thing. Like, you're being like totally selfish, totally self-centered. You're doing the absolute opposite of what you should be doing, what I'm doing. And like realizing, and it's actually, no, it's the flip. It's the reverse. I think Jesus literally said,
he literally turns around. It's like Mary has made the better decision. And it's like not trying to get everything perfect, not trying to scramble and have everything, you know, perfect.
I sound like Jesus. I'm telling you, Martha.
It was in this moment Tony realized. And then the other thing I kind of want to say was, there's like, I'm going to butcher this, but the Apostle Paul, he writes something, I'm going to say it's in Ephesians, and it's about Jesus. And he says that Jesus only did what he saw the Father doing. So that's quite Christianese, you know. So let me translate that.
Christianese.
He basically is saying that like Jesus only did the things that he felt like he was called to do. So that's the deep instead of the wide. He only healed the people that God the Father was like, psst, that one, instead of trying to go about and heal everybody. And I think in my life, I'm trying to constantly move more towards that place where, yes, the will of God or the plan for my life is a big, broad highway. But even in that, there's no sense in me taking like an off-ramp to go and try to rescue somebody that I've no business trying to rescue, or pursuing a business opportunity that is, it's not part of my 8 lanes. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of things that I can do here that I feel like I've got God's blessing on, that I feel like is for me, that I feel like, as we would say in Northern Ireland, it's written for you. And I don't, you know, I can say no to those things. You know, the sirens that are sitting on the off-ramp trying to lure me to go to Burger King. It's like, I don't need to go. Do you know what I mean? Like, like, I'm going somewhere. It's a worthy direction. It's a worthy cause. And actually, that's enough for me. You know, I don't need to take the off-ramp to Vegas that promises me, like, you can make £10 million. Like, come, you know what I mean? Like,
Judy's like my liar. Is it liar?
Yeah, liar.
Yeah. Like, she's like, you don't want to go to Burger King. I'm like, but the little Whopper.
Yeah, but then I'll be like, but yeah, I could make this and this and this. And you're like, oh.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's like the best burgers ever at our choosing. Any final words, buddy? I mean, you're just loaded with life experience and wisdom. It's so awesome that, you know, you've given us your time, you know. Any final words for people out there that I guess maybe even are trying to at least have a decision or a choice, a courage to move towards something? Because even when you started this podcast, you were a Deliveroo. You
Yeah.
were literally on your
Yeah.
bike with your podcast equipment in
Yeah.
your backpack, and I actually saw a little bit of that Colin Geddes interview of you,
Oh, yeah.
where you talked about
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
beginnings and where you are now at
Yeah.
pretty much on your way to releasing the 300th episode.
Nice.
So for those people who pretty much feel a calling, but they're like kind of like not jumping into that like double dutch, right? They're
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
I don't
yeah.
want to mess
Yeah.
that up.
Yeah.
What would you say?
I love the hero's journey. If you don't know about the hero's journey, quick Google will take you there. It's basically an ancient storytelling structure that you find in the life of Jesus in Lord of the Rings and Star Wars. It's basically this big story that you see in all the big movies. It's a story of our lives, And the first part of the hero's journey is called the call to adventure. So Lord of the Rings is probably the best well known. So it's like Gandalf shows up and tells Frodo, there's a ring. Something needs to be done about it. And then Frodo has a choice. Do I stay in the Shire? Do I stay in the familiar? Do I stay with the place that I've been in my whole life, that I know, where people know me? Or do I embark on this unknown journey? And Joseph Campbell, who is kind of one of the main researchers, proprietors, writers on the topic of the hero's journey, it's got this lovely quote where he says, the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure that you seek. And so genuinely, like, I'm not talking to everybody right now, because not everyone who's listened to this feels that stirring in their gut. But there's a few people who are listening that do, and they feel that excited, nervous energy, and that's the call to adventure. And to those people, I would say, go. Leave the Shire, whatever your Shire is, whether it's a job, whether it's a group of friends you're in, whether it's a country, whether it's a mindset, a belief, whatever, and go on that journey and step into that unknown. But the most important thing I would say is, as you do that, look really, really closely for the fellow travelers. Look for your Samwise Gamgee. Look for the other hobbits who are going on that journey with you. Because just like I was when I was 17, in that tent in Germany, without them, I couldn't have made it. And there's people in your life who will be mentors. The old man, like this guy I just talked to, he's like a Gandalf, but Gandalf won't get you there. Gandalf pops in and pops out. He doesn't hold your hand. But the fellow travelers will. And when you get beat up, they'll be the people to pick you up again. When you get an arrow to the knee, they'll be the ones to put the bandage on. And you'll do the same for them. And you need to find those fellow travelers, because that's the human journey. Never meant to do it alone. And it's such a cliche, but like, that's where the beauty is. It's in those relationships you make along the way. It's being able to actually take part in this experience we call life with other people. And the destination does not really matter. Yes, you get to a destination and it's great, and you get a little bit of treasure, or you get a little magic bottle of healing elixir, and maybe you experience breakthrough in your life, and you heal from a trauma, or you restore a relationship, or you have a breakthrough with a disease or your mental health. But then as soon as that happens, the call to adventure starts again. The hero's journey is an endless process. You finish one, you start the next one. And so always keep moving forward. Say yes to the call to adventure, and make sure you bring a couple of other hobbits along the way.
Nice. And to finally wrap up, that would be including maybe there's some kind of thing with people that have a propensity towards depression, anxiety. Is that like, it's actually a call?
Yeah.
Right?
That's the thing, So the Shire could be your depression. It's the familiar. It's the thing that surrounded you for as long as you can remember. And the only way to get out of that is you gotta go. You gotta step into the unknown. The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. That looks like so many different things for different people. it's going to a therapist. It's maybe reading a book. If you want to read something, I really can't recommend The Depression Cure enough. It's a 6-step program for overcoming depression without drugs. If you're more of an audio person, you can check out mentalhealth.fm, where we do, I think we've done like 30 podcasts with the author of that book, and he just breaks it down in such a beautiful way. But yeah, get on the adventure, because you're not going to move by standing still. And that's kind of the reality that we spoke about earlier. If you want to live like nobody else, you have to live like nobody else. Takes courage, and that's really scary. But what's your other option?
Yeah. Right. So since you're not on social media, where can people find your podcast?
Yeah, bestofbelfast.org, or if you type in Belfast on any podcast app, you'll see a yellow logo. You can click on that. And then the other one, mentalhealth.fm. Like I said, it's the mental health project. And that's the only places you can find me currently.
Awesome. And thank you so much for allowing us into your deep, dark cave here at Best of Belfast. We have you as the treasure to share it to the rest of the world.
It's fine.
And thank you. The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek.
It usually sits up there, but I think
that's interesting. Joseph Campbell, everybody. Matthew Thompson, Best of Belfast. Thank you so much, brother.
Oh, thank you, guys.
You.
Appreciate
the
it.
trilogy is
been
completed.
This is like better than the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
I think we need a little.
Yeah. Boom. Awesome.